The information I am about to share today might be difficult to process, and for some, it may come as a complete shock as it challenges everything we were taught in school. We are talking about the monumental work of Urbano Monte, a unique map of the world started in 1544 and completed only in 1613. For centuries, this historical document remained in the shadows, hidden from the general public, and only became available for detailed study in 2019. A natural question arises: why was this cartographic masterpiece kept secret for so long? The answer lies in the image itself, which completely contradicts our accepted picture of the past. The continents and oceans drawn on this paper tell the story of a world that, officially, shouldn't have existed just 400 years ago. The most striking anomaly is revealed when examining the South Pole, where modern science depicts permafrost and kilometers of ice. This early 17th century map shows a lush, vibrant land. Antarctica is depicted here as absolutely free of ice. It is a green continent, crisscrossed by full-flowing rivers, dense forests, and wide valleys. Official geology claims that the glaciation of Antarctica happened millions of years ago, long before the appearance of humans. However, the 1613 document testifies to the opposite. At that time, the climate at the pole was warm and conducive to life. And this was not a barren land. The territory is densely populated, and the fauna of this region is astounding in its diversity and strangeness. Among landscapes familiar to us, one can find creatures that we are used to considering fiction or heroes of ancient legends. Ancient cartographers recorded the presence of species now considered mythical with documentary precision. Unicorns graze on the plains, and creatures resembling dragons soar in the sky. This does not look like artistic fiction or allegory, as they are depicted alongside entirely real animals: lions, elephants, and monkeys, living not in Africa, but specifically in Antarctic latitudes. The detailing of the drawing suggests that the author did not invent these images, but recorded what actually existed in nature at that time. Particular attention is drawn to scenes demonstrating intelligent life and the interaction of different species. Antarctica appears before us as a center of civilizations where humans coexisted with beings of a different order. There are scenes of centaurs hunting, creatures with the body of a horse and the torso of a human, armed with bows. They are shown not as deities, but as ordinary inhabitants foraging for food and fighting for survival. There are also images of giants, people of enormous stature, dressed in skins, engaging in combat with local predators. The biosphere of that time also included truly terrifying creatures. One can find sketches of battles between winged entities resembling gargoyles and large felines. Equally amazing is the ornithology of the past. The huge rock bird, known from Arabian tales, is depicted here as a real predator, capable of lifting a full-grown elephant into the air. This speaks of completely different scales of living nature, and, possibly, a different gravity or atmospheric density. Life teemed not only on land, but also in the coastal waters. The map bears witness to close contact between humans and representatives of the underwater world. Creatures commonly called mermaids have a different anatomical structure here. Instead of the usual fishtail, they have two limbs ending in fins. Moreover, scenes are shown where ordinary humans use humanoid sea dwellers as a means of transport, indicating a symbiosis that existed between the land and water races. All this diversity of life forms, from Cyclopes with clubs to mysterious hybrids with the body of a panther and a female head, was the reality of Antarctica just a few centuries ago, before a global catastrophe hid this world under a thick layer of ice. The most glaring and impossible fact from the point of view of modern academic science, revealed when studying this ancient document, is the climatic state of the southern hemisphere. If we turn to the accepted geographical atlases of our time, in place of Antarctica, we find only a lifeless white cap, the familiar symbol of eternal cold and absolute unsuitability for complex biological life. We were taught that this continent has been fettered by ice for tens of millions of years, representing an icy desert where only the simplest organisms survive on the coast. However, the cartographic evidence of the early 17th century ruthlessly destroys this established picture of the world, offering a completely different panorama, frightening in its realism. Instead of the endless glaciers, ice ridges, and frozen ground we are used to, the researcher is presented with a view of a blooming, water-rich continent. The South Pole is depicted here not as the planet's freezer, but as a giant oasis with a mild and favorable climate. A careful study of the topography reveals a complex, developed network of hydrological arteries. Many large and small rivers permeate the territory in all directions, feeding vast, fertile valleys and flowing into warm ocean waters. On the banks of these winding rivers stretch dense forests, wide meadows, and rolling plains covered with lush vegetation. Nowhere, even at the southernmost points of the mainland, close to the geometric pole, is there even a hint of total glaciation, which, according to the official version of Earth's history, should have reigned there supreme for an eternity. Particularly intriguing are separate, vast areas highlighted on the canvas in a rich reddish hue. In the cartographic tradition of that time, such coloring was often used to designate zones with a particularly hot, arid, or even tropical climate. This is direct evidence that the temperature regime of Antarctica was comparable to modern equatorial Africa or the tropics of South America. We see a land ready to accept and feed a colossal number of living beings, a land breathing heat and natural abundance. Such a detailed depiction of the landscape, with a careful drawing of riverbeds, mountain ranges absolutely free of snowcaps, and forest masses, cannot simply be the fruit of a bored artist's imagination. In those days, creating maps required colossal resources and knowledge. They were compiled for practical purposes of navigation and geopolitics. So putting fictional continents on parchment with such scrupulous detail would be a senseless waste of time and money. This screaming discrepancy creates a fundamental, insoluble conflict between historical dogmas and facts captured by eyewitnesses of the past. If we believe school textbooks, then between Homo sapiens and a green Antarctica lies an insurmountable temporal chasm of millions of years. But if we trust the dating of the map, work on which was completed in 1613, it turns out that catastrophic climatic changes occurred literally yesterday by historical standards. This means that the process of turning a blooming paradise into an icy hell took not geological epochs, but possibly mere centuries. We face an extremely uncomfortable dilemma. Either all modern geochronology is wrong, and glaciation is a very recent, sudden, and catastrophic process, or this document is the greatest mystery that official science prefers to ignore. Antarctica was inhabited, green, and suitable for a comfortable life at a time when stone cities were already being built and culture was developing in Europe. And this fact alone is capable of completely overturning our understanding of the planet's past. The presence of dense vegetation and full-flowing rivers on a now icy continent inevitably implies the existence of a developed and complex ecosystem capable of supporting a huge number of biological species. Studying the fauna captured on this ancient document, the researcher faces a real cognitive dissonance. On the one hand, the cartographer depicts with flawless accuracy animals that are well known to us, but their presence in Antarctica seems impossible. Herds of elephants roam the green plains, lions hide in the thickets, and creatures resembling monkeys can be distinguished in the trees. This further confirms the theory that the region's climate was not just warm, but tropical, analogous to African or South American climates. The author of the map knew what these beasts looked like and drew them from nature, or from reliable descriptions of sailors, without making anatomical errors. However, if you let your gaze slide a little further, beyond the limits of the animal world familiar to us, the most interesting and frightening part begins. Next to completely ordinary camels and predatory cats, there are creatures on the map that in the modern consciousness are firmly anchored in the genre of fantasy and children's fairy tales. We see animals that can be identified as unicorns. It is important to note that they are depicted without any mystical halo or sacred glow. These are simply hoofed beasts grazing in meadows, drinking water from rivers, and behaving like an ordinary part of the food chain. Their anatomy is drawn with the same scrupulousness and detail as the anatomy of a deer or horse adjacent to them. There are no stylistic differences indicating that some animals are real and others are a figment of imagination. Further, we meet reptiles that cause bewilderment. These are not crocodiles or monitor lizards, but creatures that are difficult to call anything other than dragons. Winged lizards, massive and covered with scales, occupy their niche in this lost world. Strange chimeras are also found, beasts with the body of a lion, but a completely different head structure, resembling griffins or manticores from medieval bestiaries. Skeptics are used to writing off such images as the ignorance of ancient people or a desire to decorate the map. But logic suggests otherwise. Why would a cartographer creating a navigational document of state importance mix reliable geography and real elephants with fiction? The answer suggests itself, and it is frightening in its simplicity. In the early 17th century, these creatures were not a myth. They were as objective a reality as wolves or bears are for us today. Dragons, unicorns, and other monsters represented endemic species developing on an isolated continent. What we consider fairy tales today is merely a memory of the real biology of the past, distorted by time. Apparently, these species were completely destroyed during the same cataclysm that fettered Antarctica in ice, and only their images and legends reached us, becoming more fantastic with each century, losing connection with the real, living prototype. The Monte map is, in essence, the last census of a world we lost, proof that the zoology of the past was far more diverse and dangerous than is accepted in academic circles. The investigation of Urbano Monte's cartographic heritage inevitably leads us to an even more stunning discovery regarding the intelligent population of the Antarctic lands of that time. If the presence of exotic animals can still be explained by migration or extinct species unknown to science, the presence on the map of beings possessing signs of intellect and complex social organization completely destroys the familiar anthropological picture of the world. We are moving from zoology to a kind of ethnography of a lost civilization, where man was far from the only crown of creation, but was forced to share living space with creatures possessing frightening strength and different physiological characteristics. On the vast plains free of ice, detailed scenes of daily life and hunting unfold, where the main actors are centaurs. These creatures, combining a human torso and a horse's body, are depicted not as static heraldic symbols, but as active participants in the ecosystem. They are armed with bows, spears, and shields, which unequivocally indicates they possessed a culture of tool and weapon making. The map captures a moment of hunting. A centaur pursues prey, demonstrating the tactics and skills of an experienced predator. This is not chaotic movement, but organized action, implying the presence of intellect. We are presented not with a mythical image from Greek legends, but with a quite material species that occupied its niche in the food chain, and, apparently, dominated certain territories. Other, no less strange forms of life shared the neighborhood with centaurs. In the mountainous regions and on the coasts of the map, one can identify figures corresponding to the description of classic Cyclopes, giants with one eye in the middle of the forehead. One of these giants is depicted with a massive club in his hand, which speaks of primitive but effective weaponry. Next to him, ordinary human figures seem tiny and vulnerable, allowing us to assess the real scale of these creatures. This visual comparison emphasizes that Antarctica was a land where the physical parameters of inhabitants varied in a huge range, and humans had to survive next to those who surpassed them in strength many times over. Equally impressive are the scenes of interspecies conflicts, documenting the harsh reality of that world. The Cartographer recorded a battle between a large lion and a winged creature resembling a gargoyle or a demonic entity from medieval treatises. This creature, possessing powerful wings and claws, fights on equal terms with the king of beasts. Such episodes testify that these monsters were part of biological reality, creatures of flesh and blood fighting for territory, food, and survival. They were not disembodied spirits, but obeyed the same laws of nature as other animals. This entire collection of images forms an idea of a complex ecosystem where the boundaries between man and beast, between reality and what we are used to considering myth, were blurred. The people inhabiting that Antarctica lived in constant contact with these races. Apparently, what is perceived by us today as fairy tales and legends of the peoples of the world are echoes of real historical memory about times when humanity was just one of many intelligent species on the planet. The Urbano Monte map acts here as an impartial chronicle, a document confirming that our world was much more densely populated and diverse until a global force wiped these civilizations off the face of the Earth. Continuing the immersion into the secrets hidden on the Urbano Monte map, we encounter an aspect that forces us to reconsider not only the species diversity of the past, but also the very physics of biological life of that time. We are talking about scale. Modern man is accustomed to considering himself and the surrounding fauna as the standard of size, where the elephant is perhaps the largest land creature. However, documents from the early 17th century demonstrate a world of true giants, compared to which the giants of the animal world familiar to us seem like mere small prey. Antarctica appears before us as a land where completely different laws of gravity or atmospheric pressure operated, allowing organisms of colossal sizes to exist. One of the most impressive and at the same time frightening illustrations is the image of the legendary rock bird. In Arabian tales and travel notes, such as those of Marco Polo, feathered predators of incredible strength were often mentioned, but modern historians are accustomed to writing off these stories as the wild imagination of authors. The Monte map, however, presents this creature as a real fact of zoology. We see a giant bird soaring above the ground. But the most important thing is what is in its claws. It easily holds a full-grown elephant, carrying it into the air like a hawk that has caught a field mouse. To accomplish such a feat, the wingspan of this sky monster must be tens of meters, and its muscle mass must exceed all conceivable limits of modern biomechanics. This image completely changes the idea of the food chain of that time. The elephant, which we consider an invulnerable giant, in that ecosystem was merely a link in the diet of larger predators. But gigantism was not limited only to the animal world. Next to the fantastic fauna on the map, there are anthropomorphic figures whose proportions cause trembling. We see human giants, real titans, spoken of in ancient legends of almost all peoples of the world, from biblical Nephilim to Scandinavian Jotnar. These giants are depicted dressed in skins, which speaks of their wild way of life, but their physical power is undeniable. In one scene, such a giant swings a huge club at a creature that is itself a monster. If we compare the size of this man with the surrounding trees or animals, it becomes obvious that his height could reach 4, 5, and possibly more meters. The presence of such giants in the same territory as ordinary people and animals raises many questions about how the Earth's biosphere functioned just 400 years ago. Perhaps the air density was different, or the atmospheric composition was richer in oxygen, which contributed to such rampant growth of living organisms. This world of giants, recorded by the Italian cartographer, looks like an era of biological flourishing, a golden age of nature, where life was not limited to the modest sizes characteristic of our era. We, modern people accustomed to our miniature world, look at these images as science fiction, But for the inhabitants of 1613, it was a harsh and majestic reality. The global catastrophe that turned the blooming continent into an icy desert apparently destroyed this megafauna, and the race of giants first and foremost, leaving us as an inheritance only shrunken life forms and vague memories of times when titans walked the earth, and birds capable of blocking out the sun with their wings reigned in the sky. The burgeoning life captured on the Urbano Monte map is not limited to the dense forests and plains of the green continent. If we shift our attention to the coastal waters and oceanic expanses washing Antarctica, a picture opens up before the researcher capable of overturning all modern ideas about marine biology and the history of human interaction with the water element. The hydrosphere of that time appears not as a dark, hostile abyss, but as a densely populated space where the boundaries between terrestrial and underwater civilizations were practically erased. The ocean was as much a home for intelligent beings as the land, and this fact is documented with frightening mundanity. The first thing that catches the eye when studying marine inhabitants is their anatomical structure, which differs radically from the folklore images familiar to us. We are used to imagining mermaids and mermen as creatures with a human torso and a fishtail. However, the map of 1613 offers a completely different, more realistic morphology from a biological point of view. Local inhabitants of the depths are depicted not with a single tail, but with two fully formed lower limbs ending in wide, powerful fins. This indicates that before us are not magical chimeras, but possibly an amphibian species capable of moving both in the water column and, probably, emerging onto rocky shores. Their bodies look functional, adapted for maneuvering in currents, which gives the images the status of a scientific sketch, not a mythical illustration. Even more amazing is the nature of the interaction of these creatures with humans. The map lacks scenes of aggression or fear typical of legends about sea monsters. On the contrary, we see evidence of amazing symbiosis. Moments are captured where ordinary people, dressed in the clothes of that time, calmly sit astride large marine inhabitants or use humanoid water creatures as guides or transport. One of the male characters of the water people is depicted pointing the way to a passing ship, which testifies to the presence of intellect and the possibility of communication between sailors and inhabitants of the ocean. This is not a wild element, but a zone of cooperation where humans and sea dwellers could coexist and help each other. The waters around Antarctica are filled with other bizarre forms of life. Here one can discern creatures resembling sea dragons with claws, giant reptiles, and hybrids that defy modern classification. Some scenes show these creatures hunting, others, their peaceful swimming next to sailing ships. All this forms an image of a planet where the ocean was not a dividing barrier, but a bridge between cultures. We see a lost era when humanity was not locked exclusively on land, but had access to the resources and help of the underwater world. Where did this civilization of amphibians and giant sea beasts vanish? Probably climate change and the freezing of the poles destroyed their habitat or forced them to retreat to such depths where contact with us became impossible. Today's ocean for us is a dead desert compared to that world teeming with life that existed just 400 years ago. Having studied all the details of this astounding document, we inevitably approach the darkest and most disturbing part of our investigation. Before us lies not just a sheet of paper with drawings, but a kind of obituary for a whole world that was full of life, energy, and reason just 4 centuries ago. We have just observed a continent where forests rustled, rivers flowed, and where complex life forms, from centaurs to giants, built their way of life. Today, in this place, there is only a silent, icy desert, where any biological activity is practically reduced to zero. This contrast between the blooming past of 1613 and the icy present gives birth to the most terrible question. What happened to our planet? We are not talking about slow geological processes taking millions of years, which we are told about from university lecterns. If we believe the Monte map, the catastrophe occurred instantly by historical standards. In just a few generations, a blooming paradise turned into an icy crypt. This is confirmed not only by images of Antarctica. If we look at the African continent on the same map, we can notice another global anomaly. The famous Sahara Desert, which today represents an endless sea of sand, is depicted on the early 17th century map as a blooming land, abundant with lakes and rivers. The desert is marked there only as a small patch, which, apparently, was just beginning to emerge. This suggests that the climate of the entire Earth was completely different: humid, warm, and favorable for giant life forms. The event that divided history into before and after must have had the character of a planetary cataclysm of incredible power. Perhaps there was a sudden pole shift, a change in the planet's axis of rotation, or another event that led to a so-called flash freezing. Imagine the horror of that era. The blooming valleys of Antarctica, inhabited by centaurs, cyclopes, and outlandish beasts, were instantly fettered by extreme cold. All these civilizations, all these biological species that we consider fairy tales today, did not just leave or die of old age. They were destroyed by the elements, possibly in a matter of days or even hours. The ice shell of Antarctica, the thickness of which today reaches several kilometers, most likely hides beneath it not just rock formations, but the preserved ruins of this lost world. There, in the depths of permafrost, lie the bodies of giants, the remains of dragons, and everyday objects of intelligent beings who did not have time to escape. The Urbano Monte map is the only thing left from that era, a testimony to how fragile our familiar world is. We live on a planet that is capable of changing beyond recognition in the blink of an eye, wiping entire continents and species off the face of the Earth. The main mystery of this map lies not in what is drawn on it, but in why this world disappeared so quickly, and why official history preferred to forget about it, turning real inhabitants of the past into myths and legends. The answer to this question frightens much more than the sight of any monster depicted by the ancient Cartographer, because it hints at the cyclical nature of such catastrophes and that humanity is, perhaps, just another temporary tenant on this unpredictable Earth. The history we are taught may turn out to be just a screen hiding the scale of a tragedy that happened quite recently, and Antarctica keeps this silence under its eternal ice.